Good morning and welcome to another episode of Iconic Freedom, the Formula. We are setting the standard for accountability and responsibility, doing no harm to others, accepting the responsibility of our choices. Let each care for self and all will be cared for.
Let me ask you this. Right now, headlines everywhere, of course, you don't respect, but there are headlines out there that say, when you win your second term, that you are going to make the people that have come after you pay. Retribution and revenge.
Yeah.
And let me ask you this before you even respond to that. I want to play what if with you for a minute. What if when you win this election, you said, enough is enough. Too much is too much. This is a race to the bottom, and it stops here. It stops now. They've made a half a dozen or more major attempts to take you off the playing board, right. And you just said, it stops now. I am going to rise above this cycle of ugly. I'm not going to play this gotcha retribution game. It stops now. I'll forgive, I'll not ever forget, but I am not going to play this retribution game. I am going to put the American people first, not getting my pound of flesh first. You got to do what you got to do. But I'm going to put this country as the shining city on the hill. I am moving forward. I'm not playing the retribution game. It stops with me, it stops here. What if you took that approach?
I'm okay with that. I'm okay.
So we are right into it with another episode of looking at language of manipulation. This was a fascinating interview to me. And one of the things that I want to do with it, and I want to do with other clips as the summer goes on, is I really want to deep dive into the manipulation of language, because people use words, they use their emotions to manipulate, but those things are not always necessarily assimilated, might be a good word, or noticed, because we just see a lot of things in conversation that people might just see as common. Oh, they're always going to talk this way. They always use a particular type of language. But I'd like to dissect it. What is the reason for doing that? So that if you're listening to this, if you want to go down this rabbit hole of accountability and responsibility, that you can then recognize what are some of the things that people are doing. What are the manipulations, those small, subtle things that they do or say that highlight basically what they're trying to do is get a person to do something. Now, I will say this. Okay, if you have a child and you're trying to get your child to do something, this makes sense, right? You want to try to get your child to do something, so you manage how you interact with your child, their behavior, outcomes, back and forth, right? It's circular. It keeps going that way. If you're an adult and you're trying to do that, that is a very different story. If you are training someone and they have asked for that kind of training or that guidance or that mentorship, then absolutely it makes sense that you want to try to get them from A to B to C. But you are honest about the choices that you're making so that they understand, I've said this or I've done this, so that you can see the example, you know what's going to go before you, you know how to react to it, you know how to speak to it, that kind of stuff. If you're not telling people, if you're, in essence, you're not giving them a choice, well, then you're manipulating them. Now, if that's your deal and that's your jam and you want to do that, hey, more power to you. However, it is not with integrity. It is not with character. It definitely isn't being accountable and responsible, because you're playing a game. Now, if you want to play a game, that's on you. But if you want to get healthier, if you want to move to a healthier state of mind, then recognizing when you're doing it is going to be most important. And one of the ways of recognizing when you're doing it is to observe it in others. It's a fascinating thing to observe behavior in other people that helps you recognize it in yourself. And so you've probably heard this before, it's like, oh, people are a mirror to me, It's like, well, it's kind of true, is that they are mirroring back to you what is within you. Now, is that always the case? No. If you are at a high level of healthy state of mind, then no, all you're doing is observing. That doesn't necessarily mean that it exists within you. But if it is something that you are endeavoring to work on for yourself, to get past something, a behavior or something of that nature, then having other people reflected back to you can be very powerful, because it can help you understand, oh, that's interesting. It's like I do that behavior. It's one of the reasons why I think reality shows are so great, because I won't watch them, but I think they're good and useful because they reflect back to a society of how crazy people are. But then it helps people look at their own crazy and go, do I behave like that? Do I do that on a date? Do I do that with my family? Do I do that in the grocery store? That kind of stuff. So this next one, okay, so the first one there was really talking about how Dr. Phil is attempting to use language. He's attempting to stroke the strings of the emotion from President Trump, trying to get him to acknowledge and then to commit that he's not going to do retribution. He's not going to be doing, revenge, all this other kind of stuff. Now, I don't know what is in his head, meaning Dr. Phil's head, about this issue with revenge and retribution. That's about him. So know that when people start talking in those terms, that issue is about them. Because if he had accountability and responsibility within his organism, it wouldn't even come up. And what is it about that it wouldn't come up? Because he, like Trump, would understand that accountability must be enacted to those who have transgressed, who have harmed others. It's the only way some people can be managed and dealt with. That's why there's law. What is law for? To deal with people who have caused harm to others, right? So we talk about accountability, responsibility, do no harm to others. And when you do harm to others, then there must be a consequence. You teach this to your child. If you're a teacher, you teach it to your classroom. If you do something to harm another, there would be a consequence. It's a natural part of life. Every choice has an outcome. So every choice and that outcome is a consequence in a lot of circumstances. Because you did A and B, C now has happened. So now you have to manage that. Now you have to deal with it. That's why it's so important of the choices that you make, that you are conscientious of those choices and you're not being whimsical about those choices. Here's the next clip.
Think of it. How would it look if I took a president of the United States wife and threw her into a prison? I hated it because I wanted to bring the country together, and I largely did. And I brought it together through success because it was the most successful economy in the history of our country. Okay. Now, the difference is they're trying to do it to me. And maybe you could feel differently about it, but I don't feel differently. Retribution is going to be through success. We're going to make it very successful. We have to bring the country together.
And you can do that. Because let me tell you, this revenge thing, there's a lot of research, and Dr. James Kimmel at Yale has done this research and seen neurologically in the brain that there's an addiction to revenge, just like to opioid or whatever. And that even if people commit a crime and they get arrested for it, they see themselves as the victim and they want revenge against the person that arrested them. And then the person that arrested them gets hammered. So now that person says, okay, well, I'm not going to put up with that. So they go back after the criminal. Now the criminal has been victimized again. And so we get into this loop where we're addicted to it back and forth. It's got to stop. And we're better than this. We must be better than this, and you're big enough to do it. Every situation needs a hero. You can stop this. You can say,
Well,
no,
I think
it ends here. It ends with me.
I think you'll be proud of the job we do. And, the word revenge is a very strong word, but maybe we have revenge through success. But that's what I'd like to see. I want to see the country survive, because this country is not going to survive like this. And really, the expression, I think it's the greatest theme ever in politics, maybe, because it's the biggest movement. We want to make America great again, and that's what we have to do. And I think you'll be very proud of the job we do.
Okay, so again, what's interesting is the manipulation from Dr. Phil, and the manipulation comes in the form of credentialing. So in order to credential, so he already has his own decision about what his standard of life is. Okay, that's fine. I mean, doesn't matter, right? Doesn't matter to you and me. We don't care. You have your own standard. That's great. You live by it. Fine. That's your deal. You know what? I don't have to participate. I don't have to participate with you. I know how to walk away. So he set his own standard. But now, in order for him to push a little bit more with the manipulation, now he wants to bring out the credential. The credential of this study was done, or the Pope has said. These kinds of things, again, they're manipulations. If your statement has integrity, you don't need any credentialing. You don't need to hear about the Pope or some sort of scientific experiment or, what other people have done. It doesn't matter. If your statement has its own integrity and of character, it is of accountability and responsibility. You've taken ownership. You're dealing with the outcomes. You have responsibility of choice along the supply chain from the beginning to the end, then you don't need a credential. But every time you try to credential something, that should be a red flag. If somebody tries to credential something with you, that should be a red flag. Because it's a way for them to manipulate the conversation. Well, this poll says, who cares? Who cares? It doesn't mean anything. It's like watching the news these days where they keep talking about poll after poll and all this other stuff. Folks, it's months before this election is going to happen. Now, is it having its own momentum? Sure, that's great. But to somehow extract from the information that is happening right now, that's going to happen 5 months from now, is doing a lot of people a huge disservice. Because for some people, they are paying attention to it, to the minutia of it. It's like watching a football game every single second, every single minute, every single play, blah, 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 blah. And there'll be a lot of you that may agree about this, but for me, whenever I watch a game, if I'm watching the Super Bowl, I only care about the last 5 minutes. Because to be honest, if the score is close, it's only the last 5 minutes that has ever counted. And I have done this for over 2 decades of watching the Super Bowl, is my own test. Now, that's for me. That's my credential of looking at it. You do whatever works for you. But I know from my own observation, the last 5 minutes is what counts. You can go through the minutia of it if you want. If you think there's value for that, that's great. But what Dr. Phil is doing is he is attempting to manipulate President Trump with this kind of language. It stops here. It stops now. You don't do this. Almost that. You take the higher road. Well, no, because all of those things are, again, the attempt to avoid accountability and avoid responsibility. If some people have done some very illegal things, for lack of a better term, with these conspiracies, they conspired to take down a president. They conspired to, to do certain things with COVID and such. Then they have to have consequences. Because if there are no consequences, like a child, if there are no consequences, what will a child do? Keep doing it. If you say, oh, we're gonna get, we're gonna come down on you if you don't stop doing what you're doing, and they'd be like, okay, let's test it. So they go and they do whatever they want, and then you don't do anything. It's like these people saying, oh, we're going to send a very strong letter. Okay, I'm not really sure what that's going to do, because we've seen political people sending strong-worded letters all the time. That doesn't mean anything. What does mean something? Action. Action means something.
The Pope has a book out that he's written, and he says, we are all brothers and sisters, and there must be no resentment among us. For any war to truly end, forgiveness is necessary. Otherwise, what will follow is not justice, but revenge. And that's true even in the cultural wars that we're fighting here. I think you have so much to do, you don't have time to get even. You only have time to get right.
Well, revenge does take time, I will say that.
It does.
And sometimes revenge can be justified, Phil. I have to be honest. Sometimes it can.
But is the country better or worse for them going after you?
I think the country is really worse for what they've done. And I think you see that when you look at the poll numbers. When you see that almost $400 million has poured in since this horrible decision was made. That was a few days ago. Numbers that nobody's ever heard of in politics before. It's a great honor. The people of our country get it. They're very smart. Taken as a whole, I have to say, they're very smart.
Okay, so there is a couple of things on that particular exchange that I really found quite fascinating. So one of them is that Phil starts to go down the road of, oh, you've got so much to do. Okay, again, he's trying to manipulate Trump by saying, hey, here's another way that I'm trying to get you to do something. Oh, you got too much to do. And says, about revenge. And, Trump says, well, revenge does take time. And, it can be justified. And he's saying in that moment that it's about accountability. It's about responsibility of choice and what these people have done. And so Dr. Phil, that's not what he wants to hear. That's not his agenda. So he tries to kind of come at it from another angle. And then, oh, well, is the country better or worse? Okay, here we go again. Now he's making a subjective value judgment about what is better, what is worse. We don't know, because it's not over yet. You can't know something until it's completed, right? So what's interesting is that Trump, this man is very smart, and he listens, and he speaks with intent. He says, the country is worse for what they've done. What an amazing statement. So not only is he sitting there saying that revenge takes time, and it is justified, but he's also saying, and it's a very short clip on this interview, might be missed by a lot of people, maybe not interpreted a particular way, but then he comes back with that other second statement to say, when Phil wants to say better or worse, well, the country is worse for what they've done. So he is again obligating accountability to these people that have used lawfare against him and against other people, other Americans. There's a lot of Americans that are in jail or going to jail that should not be there because of the conspiring, basically, and the way they have manipulated information and what would otherwise be considered exculpatory evidence regarding various things like J6 and all the rest of that stuff.
And last, this guy wants revenge so bad he can taste it, but he knows better. And Phil, after letting him run, as Phil did throughout that interview, finally said, I want to see if I can get you where I want you. Will you take it back? Will you not be a vengeful president if you win? And he said, yes, I'm okay with that. That was really powerful. I hope he can stick to it.
What do you think about the revenge point?
You know, Dr. Phil, I love to watch interviews, and I love to watch masterful interviews, and I'm always watching how the interviewer is getting to that information. I thought that this was the part of your interview that I just found fascinating, and I watched it over and over again. You literally laid out, okay, I am now going to ask you about retribution and revenge. I mean, you just put it out there to him. And I knew it was important to you because you literally came at it 4 different times. You kept coming. The first time you said, okay, what if? What if you just said, enough is enough? We're going to stop it now. And his response was, I'm okay with that sometimes. I'm sure in certain moments I wouldn't be. You know, and then he kind of went off, and then you came in the second time. And your second time was, every situation needs a hero. You're in a position to be the hero. Do you want to do that? Will you step up? You're like constantly giving him that opportunity. And this time he kind of dodged it. He said, I think you'll be impressed. We need to unite and save the country. And then the next one you came, I mean, you were obviously prepared as you always are. You said, you know, there's research right now that revenge in this country is an addiction. We are literally feeding off it, and you could stop that cycle. And this time he said, well, you know, revenge is a strong word. Maybe we can have revenge through success. And then your last one, which I loved, was this quote from the Pope that I thought was so good. We are all brothers and sisters. Forgiveness is necessary. Otherwise, what will follow is not justice, but revenge. And then you followed up with, you don't have time to get even. You only have time to get it right. And he kind of pulled back again. He said, well, it does take time. And then he said, and I give him credit for this. He just said it to you. Sometimes revenge can be justified. So I have to be honest, you know, sometimes it is. And then you said, but is the country better or worse for them going after you?
So one of the reasons why, and I know that clip ran a little long, but one of the things that I wanted to expose in that particular one is how she drank the Kool-Aid of all the things that Dr. Phil had done. What's so interesting and, I mean, entertaining to me is that she's sitting there, she's talking about, I love a masterful interview. Yes, this is, you know, I love interviews, but masterful. And you were so masterful. And really what she's saying is, you are a master manipulator. That's what you do. You're trying to manipulate people. Now, I don't know what's going on in Dr. Phil's head. Maybe he thinks that this is a good thing. But she laid out the case for every single thing that he said in terms of him trying to credential, trying to go after Trump in another way, trying to get him to say something that maybe Trump doesn't want to say. And even Trump is smart enough. I think some of those quotes were incorrect the way she said them because we just listened to him on this podcast. That is not what he said. He said that revenge, and, you know, to go back to the quote itself, that the country is worse for what they've done. Revenge does take time and is justified. And that's about accountability. It amazes me how people so easily that do not possess accountability and responsibility just gloss right over it. And they're thinking that because they're so self-righteous, they're about being right. I mean, he even said, it came out of Phil's mouth, you're so busy you don't have time to be doing that, you only have time to be right. There is no right. There is accountability. There is responsibility. If you want to apply a value to that, good luck to you. Because life is going to be rough on you if you're always trying to figure out what's right. If you figure out what is correct for you through your own accountability and responsibility, you got nothing to worry about.
And I think when he had to admit the country wasn't better off with them going after him, so it won't be better off with him going after them. And at that point, I think it landed with him, and I think he understood. And this is a process. This is a process. I think I think it's something that you don't just flip a switch and it changes like that. I think it's a process. It's a matter of who's in his ear and what they're talking about. But I think it was a quantum shift for him to even consider anything other than full speed ahead, get the bastards.
Yeah. And then just to wrap this up, I have to say that I think Dr. Phil has a very inflated sense of himself, especially when he lacks accountability and responsibility. I don't even think he understands what those terms mean. Maybe he should listen to this podcast. But anyways, because the arrogance of saying that, I think what I said landed finally for him. Oh, Phil, Dr. Phil, what a benevolent individual you are, that you pursued a conversation and that you pursued an interview with Trump, trying to get Trump to be softer and kinder. Oh boy, here we go. So now he's decided how this president should be. Dr. Phil should take a chapter out of Art of the Deal and start listening to how somebody like Donald Trump knows how to negotiate with people. May not be your thing, may not be your president, may not be the way you want to do things. Understood. But you cannot deny an individual that has the ability to masterfully, in this sense, applied to Donald Trump, to look at a situation and to be able to look at multiple levels of trying to accomplish an outcome and to a conclusion. And it's very interesting to me how there are people that want to use their language, use their credential, the credential of others, in order to try to get him to do something. So now I say apply to your own life. How do you try to get people to do something? Or how are other people trying to get you to do something? What is the language that they're using? What are the manipulations of that language that they're using? What kind of credential are they going after, trying to get you to do what they want? If you recognize this, if you hear it, if you see it, if you saw it in the clips that you saw today, if you heard it in the clips today, then as you go through your week, watch and listen and observe, where is that happening in my world? Not just maybe what I might be doing, but mainly what are others doing? What is the media doing? What is Hollywood doing? What are all of these social constructs doing that are trying to get you to do something, to get you to adapt and to accept things? How do you know what you think you know? And the only way that you can know is to know for self, but you got to know what's going on with yourself internally. You can't know where you're going if you don't know what you're doing. And you can't recognize these fundamentals, these manipulations that people are doing, if you're also not looking to see if you're doing it yourself. And that music once again means we have come to the end of another terrific podcast. I know this ran a little long. I hope you really enjoyed it. I will continue to do this throughout the summer. It'll be a lot of fun. Hey, hit that like button if you would. Share it with your family and friends. You never know how it might help them out. Happy Father's Day to all you dads out there. Let each care for self and all will be cared for. See you next week.